Times were hard in Europe, but with war looming between England and Spain, there were opportunities for enterprising captains. The Admiralty commissioned all available ships to bear the makings of war.
What better time than now to talk about a video game that's all about anything except snow and winter. This is Seadogs, a video game developed by the people at Akella in Russia about 16 years ago. A game that went down in history as the beginning of a certain type of video game. Now, pirate games have been around for a while. They were even around back when Sid Meier made Sid Meier's Pirates. Granted, there weren't a lot of pirate games back then. There was maybe the Pirates of the Barbary Coast, which I've never actually played, but there have always been games like this one. Only Seadogs took it a step further because Akella decided to not just make a game where you fight with ships from a top-down perspective, where everything is arcadey in its motion. Instead, they tried to create a more authentic experience of actually sailing a ship, of engaging in naval combat, and for the most part it did a good job. And sure, it didn't actually do everything well. For example, they didn't implement collision physics with the, collision damage physics with the terrain, so you could just smash your ship into an island and it would just stop and you wouldn't get any penalty for that. You just had to spend some time turning around and going off again. But it was still a step up from what we used to have in the old days, and with future iterations of the Storm engine, the realism just got better and better, even though realism wasn't actually going to be the main focus of the game originally. From what I've heard on the internet, Akella originally wanted to make this an RPG in the more traditional sense. Yeah, it had a nautical theme, a pirate theme, but it was supposed to have other elements like magic as well, so that's why it's set in a fictional version of the Caribbean where none of the islands have actual names from reality, and it's actually not that big in terms of how big Pirates was, in terms of giving you the entire Caribbean. Now, if the idea of making a game with pirates and magic together in the same place makes you think of Monkey Island, you should probably add also the RPG aspect to it, and you'll be thinking of Risen 2, which was a dreadful game compared to Risen 1. I'm still kinda sad that the people at Piranha Bytes went in that direction, so I'm glad that the people at Akella didn't. That they stuck to making a game that was still set in a fictional world, but one that was grounded in reality, at least for this portion of the series. You played as Nicholas Sharp, a young man, a young captain set out to make some money in good old European trade on the high seas as an honest merchant. He gets robbed, kidnapped, enslaved, taken to the Americas, and he escapes with the help of some other slaves, and they all become pirates and he becomes the new captain. All the while holding in his hand a necklace given to him by his mother with the last image he has of his father, a mysterious man that he only remembers sailing away when he was very, very small and is now presumed to be dead. Or is he? Dun dun dun! Something you need to remember is that this game was released a couple of years before the whole Pirates of the Caribbean craze just made everybody produce things about pirates for a while. So the story may seem cliche to you, but back then it was kind of cliched because that was the main cliche of every pirate movie and pirate story, but still in terms of video games, it wasn't that bad. And this, like I've said, it was still an RPG. Even though there was no magic in it, there were RPG elements galore. You had dialogue. A lot of it. You could insult people, they'd be upset with you. You had skills. You had NPCs you could recruit to make your skills better by a passive buff. Well, passive in the sense that they gave it to you and you paid them a lot of money so they wouldn't quit. Or mutiny. More than likely, mutiny. And like any good, self-respecting game about pirates, this one actually had a very well put together economy. Every port had a certain type of good it produced, a certain one it imported, it exported, and you had to find a balance between them to get the most profit you could with the ship you had. You could just play this game as a merchant for the most part, though you would be dragged into combat once in a while because, you know, that story about your father being lost at sea and him being a pirate, that would sort of drag you between all the different factions of the area. You had the French, you had the Spanish, you had the English, you had pirates, and you would have to go through each of them time to learn the full story, to get to the ending of the tale. But the game wasn't about that at its core. It was about you starting off with a very, very poor ship and building up your own fleet. That would take time, that would take a lot of skills, experience, money, but eventually you would be one of the terror of the seven seas. You would engage treasure fleets that numbered in the dozens of ships, well, 8 dozen of ships. You, along with the people at your side, the first mates you put in charge of other ships, Hosea wasn't all that bright, and your crew that you never actually got to fight along with in combat, to just duel the enemy captain like in Pirates, and a more awkward version of that combat system from Pirates. Awkward is a name I would gladly use to describe this game. The sea combat is good. Like, sea combat in this game is great. I have no problems with it. Maybe not as tactical as it will later be in other games made by Akella in this series and in some other series. Akella, by the way, made Age of Sail 2. Not the first one, just 2. And it was a better tactical combat simulator for sea battles. Granted, that was not this kind of game. It was more focused on just combat and not the actual world, visiting towns, speaking to people, you know, other stuff that make up a good pirate game. But even though this was the first one they did, the sea combat was still good, because it allowed someone that understood how wind worked, how cannons could be fired for better effect. It let people that had skill actually be able to do great things. Even with a very poor ship, you could still be a danger to other people. You just had to know how to maneuver it, how to use every bit of sail to your advantage. It gave you a certain feeling that you, with your small little ship, you sank that big merchant, and granted, you only got a tiny bit of its cargo, but you got enough experience to level up, and hey, now people are more afraid of you on the open seas. And some people are probably actively hunting you now. It was a good, well-made combat system. And that alone, like the sea combat, the navigational portion, that is the best part of this game. That is what was made, I wouldn't say flawlessly, but it was made in the best way possible. Because in other terms, this game doesn't understand motion. You want to move with the forward backwards key? No. You want to move with WSD? No. You move with click and right click. And awkward as hell. For a game made in 2000, this game has movement, like character movement, akin to something you would find no, not even the first Alone in the Dark had movement this awkward. And that game had awkward movement. You were controlling a sort of tank that looked like a reject from the Tron special effects department. Now, it was 1993, yeah, the graphics weren't gonna be that good for Alone in the Dark, but still, it controlled better than the character you have and Seadogs. Animations were clunky. Ships are okay to animate because they don't have any animation to animate. The sails move from time to time, that's it. You had to mod in the crew. If you wanted to have a crew on your deck, you had to install a mod to do it. Later games would solve this, but this one, they didn't have it. And the combat, the one-on-one Captain vs. Captain combat was, again, awkward as hell. It didn't have any flow to it, it didn't have any fluidity to it, it was just awkward. It's stuff like this that makes the first Seadogs kind of a pain to play at times. But the other stuff compensates for it. You have this large open world that you can explore, that you can terrorize with your fleet, rob, sink, plunder, pillage. You have a variety of quests you can do, characters to interact with. You have so much freedom and so many options. You can attack a fort. You can plunder an island. It gives you a great experience of actually being a pirate. And that's what made it good. It also had a bunch of bugs, which is kind of par for the course in this series. Up until the Seadogs, Akella was mostly a company that localized and distributed games in Russia. With Seadogs, they kind of made it big. They made it so big that the sequel was an officially licensed game for that series of movies I've mentioned earlier, Pirates of the Caribbean. Seadogs 2 was retrofitted to fit into the idea of Pirates of the Caribbean, but only in terms of thematics. It didn't have any elements of the story, though. I believe there was an Isla de la Muerta or something, and at the end you did fight a giant ship made of skeletons called the Black Pearl, and there were mystical elements in it. Skeletons, you would fight them, there were potions, and a bunch of mystical mumbo jumbo, but in terms of the core mechanics, the sailing was better, it had more options for realism, the combat and movement on land were noticeably better, still not great, but better, and they even enhanced the economics of the game. There were fewer islands in that game, but you had smuggling where you could import forbidden goods into certain areas, and you had to fight the guards if they stumbled upon you, and you had to fight them, if I remember right, you had to actually fight them with your crew, though I actually haven't played that game in a longer time than I did Seadogs 1. Mostly because Seadogs 1 you can buy right now off GOG. You can get it for about $6 or probably less, but Seadogs 2, Pirates of the Caribbean, you can't, because it's still a bit of a licensing issue with, Disney, because they own the franchise and the game was licensed, so it's kind of a quagmire. But the rest of the series is kind of available on GOG and Steam in its different iterations. Also, you have the Age of Pirates series, which in essence is still Seadogs. I believe they had some issues with the rights to it, so they changed the name for a while, but then they changed it back. Now, the games, I've only played the release version of some of them, and release versions in the Seadogs series, not a very good idea to play. It's recommended that you wait a couple of months, maybe a year, and then raid the modding forums and fill your game with all the mods, because you'll have a much better experience in the end. But they all increased the scopes of what you could do in these games. They gave you new possibilities and new ways to make yourself feel like a pirate in the golden age, when you could raid the Spanish main, when you could plunder booty, and when you could make people walk the plank. You couldn't actually make people walk the plank in any of these games, from what I know, and it also lacked sea shanties, which, granted, is the single greatest thing in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Otherwise, it is a very subpar pirate game, and I'd recommend Seadogs any day of the week. So if you haven't played it, go try it. Or go try the newer versions of the series, especially after they added pixel shader to the water and actually made it look wet. Well, that'll be all the gaming history shows we have for this year, but we'll be back next year with more old games that you may have played, may have not, but you'll get to see around here anyway. Goodbye. Thank you for watching this show. If you enjoyed it, please consider watching some of our other videos and maybe sharing them or giving a thumbs up if you feel like it. And if you really liked what you saw, please check out our Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you could help us make much better shows and get some rewards in the process. Or you could consider buying my book called Tale of Doom. Volume 1 is out now and available for just $2. And as always, if you thought it was horrible, you know where to find me and complain about it.